We're a service business. We're a people business. I'm Joshua. I help organizations become healthy so that others can thrive. The average size MSP in the US, I think, is maybe 2 to 4 people. If you get to 30 or 40 people, you're actually a massive MSP and you don't even know it.
I spent 3 years in a seat with a label that's still annoying, which was VCIO. I was the tech guy that got taken on every sales appointment.
You know, when you call AT&T because your internet's out, you talk to the person and then you hang up the phone, and the first thought you have is that's never getting fixed. That's the opposite of the experience we want. What we want is the experience where someone calls and they think they have it and they don't worry about it again. The problem is if you let the sales guys do whatever, then you're going to grow in such a way that will break the business in other areas. You'll lose clients. And so then you have your churn happening as fast as your sales are happening. I got it from a pastor named Craig Gershell, pastor of one of the largest churches in the US. I started from his garage. So he's grown through that, talks about just organizational growth. At these sizes, we had to change things operationally about how we did the business.
Joshua, welcome to the MSP Insider Show. Please tell the audience who you are, what you do, and why the hell that you do it.
Yeah, great. I'm Joshua, and I help organizations become healthy so that others can thrive. That's the sense of calling I carry into any role I'm in. Currently, I've been in the MSP industry for most of my career, with a few sabbaticals into some other spaces, but seeing growth at all sizes, 10 all the way up to 800. And currently, I'm director of integrations for a company called IT Voice that's headquartered in Birmingham, Alabama. But I'm at my house in Central Texas and work from there, and thinking through how to help as you acquire a bunch of companies. How do you help integrate them in such a way that people have clarity about their roles and their responsibilities, and that services increase because of that?
Awesome. I'm going to break my own script a little bit because I want to unpack really the pre-frame of who you are and the breadth of experience that you have. Just set it up for the audience so that they know they really should stick around and listen to what you can share and why. Because even those numbers that you gave, right, 10 to 800 is such a broad spectrum, almost from the smallest to the largest, right? I consider myself to be extremely fortunate because I worked from 4 to about 133, right? So I still saw quite a bit of it, but 133 is drastically different than the gap between that and 800. Maybe just spend, a minute or two walking through maybe some of those milestones of maybe not necessarily the who's, but the what's and the how's at each one of those stops.
Yeah, so the way I got into the MSP space, not where I thought I'd end up, but a friend of mine, there was a commercial division of a DoD contractor, and a friend of mine said the owner was going to create a actual business out of that was commercial facing entirely, and that was an MSP. Didn't know what that was at the time. Got in on that. I think we were actually, when we started, not 10 but 12, but just right around that range. And then that grew over about 5 years to about 40 people. And that's where I ended up working in like every area of the business in terms of, if you think of the 3 buckets of managed services, kind of preemptive version of managed services, which most people call the NOC, and then professional services, the project delivery side of it. Worked in all 3 of those teams, and it was basically, as we grew into a new team, I joined that, helped build it, and then left and went to another team and started another one. So that was the first foray, and then left there to take one of my sabbaticals to work for a global nonprofit running IT. And had MSPs on the other side that were supporting us, and so I got to see both sides of the table at that point. And that was an interesting journey of I get some other perspective, especially helpful going back in, dealing with clients and managing a business. So the next round was 2 friends bought 2 MSPs and said, hey, you don't know the teams or the clients, merge these together in 3 months and don't break the business. And that was stupid to say yes to. It was probably the right answer, but it worked, and a lot of growth. With growth, I think most people have figured out at some point in their lives that the way you get through growth is by going through hard things. And so there was definitely some hard seasons in that, but it was really, at the end of the day, a good outcome. We transacted that business to a platform company and went from, that one was 30 to 50, depending on the season and the revenue and things like that. It fluctuated between those. And Then we transacted to a company and suddenly became 200 people, and that was fun. They had combined four companies in about a quarter of the year,
Hmm.
and we had to figure out what to do with that.
Yeah.
And so spent a couple years figuring that out, and then went to another company that was similar, a platform company. They needed help with their integration efforts, and their plan was we're going to buy a company a quarter, you integrate them in.
Hmm.
You have experience with that, so you know enough of what you're doing to do that. That was 300 people, and so uh, and what I've learned through that, and then I'll go to the last one. And I've told some friends this as they've been growing their businesses is at multiples of 3 and 10, you have to change your processes. Like you have to
Yeah.
overhaul them. And if you can think about that ahead of time, that's better because you may not have to overhaul as much.
Yeah.
The way I relate that is if you think about a family, the moment you have 3 kids, you have to change your vehicle. The
Hmm.
moment you have 10, you might have to get a CDL. The whole thing changes at
Yeah.
multiples of 3 and 10. And so, yeah, so that company, we transacted with another one, and that one's the most recent one, and I'll name it. That was the Antiva transaction, one of the largest in the channel. And we spent a year combining everything, and that was my last one before coming over to IT Voice. And that one, 750 to 800 people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's fascinating about your story, and I haven't ran into many people who have lived through as much of like where most of the market spends their entire life cycle is on the other side of where you got to spend yours, right? They're more like on the I have to build something so that I can sell it off and have an exit, whereas you sort of lived the majority of it on the other side of the exit, almost the entry and integrate. So it'll be
Yeah.
interesting. It'll be nice to unpack not only some of the lessons learned there, but um, the like universal truths that permeate what it is to build a great MSP that can not only grow to that size but can sustain the size too. So that's the
Yeah.
teaser, that's the preview. But now I go back to my only regular scheduled programming. I want to open the show with the question that was left behind by the previous guest. So the previous guest was William Skydema, and he's a consultant that used to do more like digital marketing, but has moved into AI consulting solutions for small
Okay.
business. And so his question is in the next 18 months, so by the end of 2026, where do you expect AI to have taken the industry? And what kind of ways will it have been implemented into almost every facet? Or where is it still lacking?
18 months. The hard part with AI is the timing of things.
Yeah.
That's the difficult part with that question.
Mm.
Because everyone knows it's going to transform stuff. It is transformative, but where in 18 months? I think my where I'm seeing the position on it is, and where we're getting the models and all the things that come into that are they're fine. Like those are going to keep increasing, and as NVIDIA comes out with new like they went from Hopper to Blackwell, and like the technology on the hardware side is increasing,
Yeah.
which helps. But the problem that I think that we're running into with scaling laws um, is around the amount of data they have.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've seen in that space a lot is where the data set is really important to having a differentiated outcome. And so if your data is not clean, um, if your data is not clean, if you don't have enough of it, then you end up coming up with problems. So, I
Yeah.
mean, at Intiva, we were very deep into the AI development
Mm-hmm.
space. You've spoken with Sagar when he was on,
Yeah.
and there's just parts of it where even there we were running into constraints around okay, how do you deal with hallucinations, things like that. So
Mm-hmm.
I think what we're going to find over the next 18 months, the big initiative that needs to happen, whether it will or not, I guess is still a question mark for me, but is around having clean data and larger data sets. And how do we do that, and how do we do that as an industry? So like ConnectWise, as an example, can't go in and take all their clients data and then shove that and make a model, because inherently encroaching on people's private data.
Mm-hmm.
But there's got to be some trade-offs to those that we develop so that we can create some larger data sets that might help the entire industry as a whole.
Yeah. Yeah. I think 18 months is a hard frame to look at that through, to your point, because AI is like the first thing that is truly distorting time so much,
Yeah.
and just its own evolutions. But I think you settled in on a really informed position in that there is still this balance between the elementary or rudimentary things that it can do well already because of the data it's been trained on, and then getting over that hump and the limitation around the data. One of the things that I'm seeing or that we're seeing is that I don't think a lot of people are talking about it ever since the whole agentic boom came out and everyone's just buzzed or I guess settled in on that buzzword is I think the emergence and the power of small language models
Mm-hmm.
within the context of large language models and agents and tool calling and like traditional software development. It's more of the recipe rather than maybe like a silver bullet
Yeah.
because of, and that might be a derivative of the problem that you described, which is the ability to train a model anymore without the data to train it.
Yeah, more specific models seem to be working better,
Mm-hmm.
is what I've seen. And then, yeah, the like model that does everything. I think most of the industry is moving away from that idea of like there's a God model out there that's
Yeah,
going to work for us.
right. Which is
Um,
almost interesting and synonymous to the way that this whole MSP industry has evolved, right? Like you could get away with being the jack of all trades person 20 years ago when the trunk slammer origination story pretty
mhm.
much survived, right? And then eventually you had to get a couple of disciplines, but you could get away with a handful, and
Yeah.
then then you had to really specialize, or really not. But either way, you kind of hit that growth plateau if you did or did not decide to specialize, or at least specialize your messaging, if nothing else.
And I think it's some of it in that, like thinking about the MSP space of like where does your business fit?
Yeah,
I don't know that I've seen anyone who ever argues against verticalizing being the most helpful, financially healthy
right.
version of an MSP. The issue that you run into is your total addressable market in that. And
Mm-hmm.
so we were verticalized at the one that I'd combined a few years ago that we transacted to a platform.
Yeah.
Um, and the issue we tended to run into is how do we grow the addressable market past a certain level? Like, so
Mm-hmm.
we were in community banks, and it's like, okay, well, there's so much in that, and honestly, that industry was and is shrinking, and so like there were constraints on that
Yeah.
dynamic.
Right. Yeah, I want to pivot into some of the things that get you going, which for the audience is also going to be like some really solid lessons learned through what you described earlier in your own progression, right? Anything from an MSP of 10 people all the way up to organizations of 800, which is, again, hard for some to wrap our minds around. But there were some universal truths that you discovered throughout that journey. And the first one, when I saw it, as one of the things you wanted to talk about really lit me up because it hits close to home, but I'll talk about that later. I want you to start by helping the audience understand one of the things that I feel the industry has shifted so far away from, which is the human connection side of it and the people part of the business. So tell me about the moment that you realized that hiding engineers behind ticket portals was fundamentally flawed.
Yeah, the I'm trying to think of an actual moment that happened, as much as it was kind of a progression, probably. But um, I think the biggest thing was so someone said this to me, and I've used it ever since, and it's just kind of burned into my brain. Is we were talking about client experience, and
Mm-hmm.
what do you want your client to experience? And this is the picture I use now is when you call AT&T because your internet's out,
Mm-hmm.
and you talk to the person, and then you hang up the phone, and the first thought you have is that's never getting fixed,
Yeah.
and that's not and so what I do is when I'm talking about client experience with any MSP I'm in is that's the opposite of the experience we want. What we want is the experience where someone calls and they hang up their phone and they
Mm-hmm.
think, oh, they have it,
Yeah.
and they don't worry about it again. That's the experience that everyone wants.
Mm-hmm.
You can talk about any industry, honestly, any service-based industry. Talk about your plumber,
Yeah.
and it's the same function of, I just want somebody who's going to come and fix the problem, and I don't have to call again.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean that is, and honestly, you can. I mean the service industry version of it. If you take our industry, take out the computers, put in something else, put in your HVAC, put in
Mm-hmm.
plumbing, whatever it is. We're a service business. We're a
Yeah.
people business. Most of our industry is supporting small, medium-sized businesses in secondary markets. That's where we live. The
Mm-hmm.
average size MSP in the U.S., I think, is maybe 2 to 4 people. If you get to 30 or 40 people, you're actually a massive MSP, and you don't
Right.
even know it.
Yeah.
At 800, I don't even want to, like, there's like
Yeah.
3, like, so.
Mm-hmm.
So most of us are 20, 30 people on a really good day. That's incredible. If
Mm-hmm.
someone builds that business, I just have all the respect for them, because I know what it takes too. And it's like, that was a hard thing to do.
Right.
Um, but you transpose it, and then you're like, okay, so this is the industry. These are the people we're serving. It's small, medium businesses. It's 80, 90% of GDP. And what everyone wants is the person who's just going to come and fix it, regardless of anything else. And so, like, hiding someone behind a ticket system, put in the email, and that's not bad. Like, you have to have your processes,
Right.
but anytime someone goes out of it and we get frustrated, it's kind of stupid. Like, why are we getting frustrated because someone's asking me for help when that's what they paid for me to do, is to ask for help? Like,
Mm-hmm.
what they really want, like, if someone emails me directly and says, hey, I need help with this, great. I'll put in the ticket for them. That's not a big deal on my end. They pay me to
Right.
do that.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to go and fix the issue. Like, that is all it is. And I think that goes into one of the things we were talking about, of the ability to care about a person is the differentiator. Like, layer on all this other junk,
Yeah.
and like cybersecurity, AI, and not, I say junk. That's all. It's actually really powerful tools that you need. Like, you need to protect your clients. You need to come up with some differentiated way of adding value to them. But at the end of the
Mm-hmm.
day, if you don't know their business, how are you going to add value in the first place?
Yeah. Right. It's like the context. It seems like, and I say this more and more, which is perfectly fine, but all of the value collectively pools there in the context. And so,
Yeah,
to your point, like, if you could be the greatest MSP with the best processes and the fanciest tools and all of the things, but you said it best, like, if you don't know their business so well, like so intimately, so clearly, you don't know how to apply it necessarily in a meaningful way to them, right? And the outcomes that they're looking for. I think that's one of the big, like, blockers to growth that I discovered along my way, was the ability to transcend or to look through, almost looking at your MSP as a sell through motion, not a sell to motion, right? Like, how do I enable the customers that I serve to obtain their objectives or exceed their objectives better, faster, more efficiently, more effectively, cheaper, whatever the lever was that they wanted to pull on, rather than just looking at my MSP through my own 4 walls and, like, just barely outside them.
yeah, yeah. There was some conversation I was having with a client. They were a law firm, and I never knew this about law firms. If you have a case open and a matter open and it's not resolved legally, and a lawyer exits, like a partner exits the firm, you have to maintain their email, and you
Mm.
have to pass it through to wherever they go next, because that attorney, because the attorney-client privilege is connected to
Mm.
that case and matter. And so it came in for just a sync up with our point of contact there, and we got into this discussion about, and she was a very technical person, and so we got into this discussion about, how do we resolve this issue for the firm, where we have to maintain these email addresses when the attorney exited, and, like, what risk does that pose? But that's a very nuanced,
Mm-hmm.
specific thing, that, and they've been our client for years at that point. And I'd worked with them for at least 3 years at that point, and we'd never had that discussion.
Yeah.
But it just took, I mean, one, they didn't know how to communicate that until this person came in, and she was very helpful. Um, and honestly, at the beginning, she'd come from an MSP, so she was evaluating us. And
Mm-hmm.
so it took a lot more effort on my part, but I would go and meet with her every other week. And as we got to know each other, it actually became a really good partnership. But it took the investment, and it took
Yeah.
the, I understand what her world looks like now, and I understand what the needs are there. Um, and I mean, they were, as far as I know, they're still a client of that MSP because there was effort put in at that point, and it pays dividends for like years and years and years down the road.
Yeah. Yeah. We used to call that at the MSPs I had worked for as the goodwill bucket. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I know I've also heard, I think David Powell calls it the trust capital. Came from Dale Walls when they were at the Corsica days, but
Yeah,
the same thing is true. What you just described, right? Like when you really get down to the heart of it, and you really make a difference or an impact, then that's that equity that you hold in the relationship. I usually
yeah,
call it the relationship equity. That it just allows you to transcend and sustain so many other either bumps in the road or extra high points. But in the end, it's the thing that truly matters, which is tangentially related to the other item that you had mentioned, which is really like the human to human impact of it. Uh, the the way that when I saw that the picking up the phone and calling portion of the thing that you want to talk about, I loved it because the larger MSP, they weren't always larger. I was employee 34 the first time. I worked for them twice, 34 the first time. We grew to about 77, something like that. I had gone to another one, came back, and then it grew to about 135 employees or something.
yeah,
Uh, but along the way, maybe to your point about threes and tens, even we had to like reinvent ourselves, right, multiple times. And one of the times, about halfway through that journey, one of the company core values, which I mean was essentially a fireable offense too, was pick up the phone and call. Like,
yeah,
and it's almost laughable to say that one of our company core values was to pick up the phone and call, but there was so much power in that being a company core value because it was also necessary because of something else you talk about where it's like the tool sprawl. The way I like to describe it is the way our tool drunk industry had gotten over the last, well, I spent 18 years in it,
yeah.
was we just we placed all these layers of tools and innovation in between the humans to where
Mm-hmm.
it just became so simple to not do what got us successful in the first place, which was really like
Right.
being dependable and relatable and personable and there and present. So let's talk first about the tools, and then we can move more towards the caring piece because I think that's huge.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Well, and
'Cause it,
one other thing, real quick, to say on
yeah.
the client facing part, yeah, I think there's some part of it too that's growth enabled. Like growth and like confuses people
Mm-hmm.
around because you start differentiating roles, right? So
Yeah.
what I said earlier of like I've worked in all those departments, so created in the knock, and I always joke the knock's job was to put the help desk out of business. Like we were supposed
Mm-hmm.
to fix the issues before the clients even
Yeah.
knew, and that's where I sometimes see it, where it's like, well, we're not client facing, and there's just times like, look, if a backup's failing,
Mm-hmm.
pick up the damn phone, call
Yeah.
the client,
Yep.
fix the problem. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and also, they're not going to care that their hard drive's filling up. They're going to care that they're not going to get their email. So tell it to them
Yeah.
that way.
Right.
And so, yeah, just, yeah, I think that's a growth enabled thing that confuses people. And so it's like, as you
Mm-hmm.
grow, as you have to reorient your processes,
Mm-hmm.
what do you put in place to recommunicate that it's still about the client and not
Yeah.
about all this other stuff? And um, what you said about that value, there was something Brian Hoppy used to tell me that was culture is not always what you, it's not what you endorse, it's also what you allow.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
so by stating it that clearly, you're saying what you're going to actually do and where you're not going to allow if it's a fireable offense.
Right. Yeah, you're right about that because that was another thing that I'd like a truism I came to understand over my time was you get what you tolerate, which was just my same similar awareness of what you just said. And
Yeah.
that was so true too. And that's the other reason why I say it was a fireable offense is like we had company core values and then we actually had a second set of customer service core values. And so between the two sets there were 14, which, you know, no best practice person would ever tell you you're allowed to have, but it's what
14. Yeah.
was necessary, right? It was like two sets of
Yeah.
seven. And yet they all were so fundamental to the DNA of that service organization and the experience that it created. And there's probably a correlation between why it became one of the largest in the area. and continues to be as well. And
Yeah.
and yet it came down to those things, right? Communication and expectations was the biggest part. Everything always came back to one of those two things, and neglecting to pay attention to the people part. There's something else that you said in there I don't want the audience to miss out on. So like perk up your ears, I'll slap the mic, is that you it was very natural to you, but the nuance was shifting what you're talking about to being the outcome the customer cares about versus the tool or the problem or the broken thing. So maybe
Right.
before we transition to the tools and stuff, we can sit on like what's the breakthrough mindset shift to help this archetype, this technical archetype that natively and default pays attention to the tool, the thing, the stuff, the process, the product, whatever, versus what you described, where it's like, how do we get to understand or talk about the outcome so that we can communicate more effectively with the people we're serving and create a better experience in the process?
Yeah. Man, that is like I know what it is for me, and that's it's hard to replicate that. Is I think
Yeah.
where I end up landing, other than work with people for years and coach them.
Right.
But the thing for me is I honestly I kind of hate computers.
Mm-hmm.
I would have burned every network to the ground if it helped people function better.
Yeah.
um, so so there's something about like if you actually care about people, and
Mm.
for someone who's an engineer, like, and I'm have my degrees in computer science. I'm an engineer by background,
Sure.
but I have a bachelor of arts because I wanted to take language instead of math, and so
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of a function that's weird.
Yeah.
Um, but for someone who's like that's really what they love and care about, um, if you can help them see that the people are actually the thing that enables the rest of it. Like computers are pretty boring
Mm.
if you don't attach them to other stuff.
Yeah. Right.
And that's maybe the way I would communicate it is like without the internet, a computer is actually pretty boring.
Mm.
The internet's what made it interesting,
Yeah.
and what made everyone start buying them. And so there's something about network
Mm.
effect of a device that causes that to communicate out that, oh, that's where the value is. It's actually with the people.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't feel like I threw an unfair question at you, but I'm trying to answer it myself too, through that same lens. And I come to a similar answer, which is like how I came to understand that was by standing in the furnace for so long and like having a
Yeah.
desire to not stand in that hot spot anymore, right? Like I made a lot of mistakes. My career is just the byproduct of failing a hell of a lot and not stopping and like taking opportunities that I maybe wasn't ready for and becoming the person that I needed to be successful in it. And yet I had to learn, maybe hard way is not the right way to say it, but I was never the smartest technician in the room. I didn't have a technical background. I didn't have an IT education. I just worked for Best Buy and then got a big boy job as an IT person. I didn't even know what an MSP was. Day one on the job, I had to join computers to a domain, and I didn't know what that was because I only knew work groups before then. It's like the whole world was opened up, and then like my problem solving brain loved it. But to your point, I liked the people part more than the tech ever. I was
Yeah.
good at the tech, but I was only good at the tech because I knew the people well enough that I knew who the smartest people were in the room and I knew how to unlock them as a person to want
Right.
to help me figure out how to solve this thing I didn't understand. And all the way down to this very specific example. And I used to give this a lot too. Like when I was on the help desk, one of the things I loved the most about being on the help desk was getting a ticket and firing up the RMM session. Why? Because I got to see someone's desktop. And as soon as I saw someone's desktop, I knew everything I needed to know about them. And I
Mm-hmm.
knew exactly
Yeah.
how I could talk to them. I knew the questions that I could ask. I knew the tonality I could and couldn't use. And I would ask questions about things that had nothing to do with the computer or the problem or the shit they were dealing with. And it would be about, like, talk to me about the 69 Mustang that's on your background with the grandkids
Right.
sitting in the back seat, right? And you spend 20 minutes talking to the person, building a human connection with someone. And I'm actively working and solving the problem. And then it's like, okay, hey, I think you're good. Can you check it real quick? And they're like, oh my God, I didn't even realize you were doing anything. To me,
Yeah.
that was the magic in it. Like I loved that problem of like, how
Yeah.
do I how do I mystify this human long enough to do the technical stuff underneath?
Yeah.
But I don't know how. I never knew how to instill that in someone else. It's why it made me a terrible manager along the way when I tried that a few different times. Because I'll bet I was in my late 20s, early 30s before I even became aware of the fact that the rest of the human beings on this planet do not see the world the same way that I do, universally. I mean, sure, there's some that
Yeah.
do, but that was an interesting like awakening in some ways too, which made it make sense why the way I would communicate didn't register at times to certain other people.
Yeah.
But it
Yeah.
was always the human part.
I tend to find that the people who are best on the help desk, they're great in every other part of the business, and people who are great in every other part of the business maybe aren't,
Mm-hmm.
if they've never worked the help desk. Like that is, and that's the most risky part of the business
Yeah.
financially, but it's also the part that that you can deliver. Like that's where everything started. And so if someone has that, then they can transpose the downstream impacts of everything else they're doing. So if you work on the knock and you started there, you don't know why when I release this patch, it's going to break everyone else's lives over across the fence over there.
Right. Yeah.
So
Let's dive into the multi-tool layer conversation. So
yeah,
the way that you like to say is that you don't need more tools. What would you say
never.
is the core like upside mining playbook that makes your approach so different than really the industry's mindset around that?
Yeah, I mean, so I think the difference is actually looking at the financial outcomes you're going for.
Mm,
Um, so I mean, if we took and there's constraints, and I can talk about constraints all day. I was the tool guy for Intiva, so I can talk about the tools in detail all
yeah.
day. But if
Right.
we just take like you're a 40-person MSP, you have 10,000 endpoints. Let's go with
Mm-hmm.
that. And you're using Automate. Automate can literally do all of the stuff that you want it to do. It can do the network monitoring. It sucks to build out, but it can do it.
Yeah.
You don't need to deploy Aavik. Now, it sucks to build out, so maybe there's a time thing that you're
Sure.
looking at there of like the time investment isn't worth it, so let's deploy Aavik, whatever. Like, um, but if you don't look at it from the financial side of that equation, then you're
Mm,
just layering on stuff, and at the end of the day, you're increasing your surface area
mm-hmm.
for attack. Because there was one point we had, I think I did the math on it, and it was one of the smaller orgs, and we had to deploy 6 or 7 agents per endpoint, and that's like
Mm,
AV,
yeah.
RMM,
Right.
like all the stuff, and you're like 6 or 7 for like this seems like it should be simpler
Yeah.
than that surface area. So it got to the point that every vendor that wanted to talk to me, I was like, look, I'm just increasing my risk on how many tools I'm putting on a machine.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the part where I don't know that everyone needs other tools, unless they do the financial math of why do they need the other tool, and how are we going to fully capitalize it? Like, how are we
Mm,
going to actually use all of it?
yeah.
Um, because most of the time, what I end up finding is that it is not built correctly, or it's underbuilt, and there's 30 other things on there that you could use
Mm-hmm.
that you're not using. And if you actually use those first, you don't have to deploy this other thing, and you can reduce your risk, you can reduce your cost, or
Yeah.
control your cost.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I found also that like along my journey as a buyer in the MSP, making those tool decisions and stuff too, one of the most frustrating parts about every single one of them was maybe when it was dual sided, but when the vendor didn't realize, wasn't aware of, or didn't acknowledge the problems that their solution created in my world. Right. So like every solution creates one or more additional problems, whether that's just
Yeah.
operationally or training or any of the other stuff that you probably know way better than me. Um, so that was frustrating. But then on the other side, to your point about what I ended up always just calling failure to launch, right? We would get a new tool or any of that stuff, and you'd get it 20% deployed, 80% deployed, but like never fully utilized and never fully value extracted. And it came down to usually one of those two things: either we didn't have the discipline along the way to have like universal standards truly deployed through all the environments, so like that was just the issue, or
Yeah.
it was maybe not maybe the vendor didn't tell you necessarily what you would really need to put into it from a labor standpoint to really even get the damn thing deployed, right? And
There's some that at a certain scale require more full-time employees.
yeah, exactly, right. And that's, I had several of those where it was like you made the decision just because you wanted to stand up and get to like demo quality deliverable, but the demo quality deliverable was nearly impossible without throwing two FTEs at it for 6 or 8 months. And it's like, well, shit,
Yeah.
didn't account for that. And so what's interesting as I'm hearing you talk about it, because of the scale and the size that you were working with, the financial model backwards actually makes a lot more sense. And that's really counterintuitive to most MSPs because it seems like most MSPs, and when I say most, the majority of the market, like 80% of them are what you described, right? 4 to 6-ish employees, sub $1 million in revenue. So I'm not talking in absolutes or platitudes for no reason. Most
Yeah.
of the MSPs in the industry, they their only financial metric is like whether or not they were cash flow positive that month. And
Right.
like that's the extent that they know their numbers, maybe. Um, so is
Yeah.
there a
Those unit economics are important.
right?
You,
Yeah.
you gotta, because I mean, if we're talking about this that size, so
Mm-hmm.
4 to 10, um, so I know what it is at like 60, 70,000 endpoints of what the costs
Yeah.
are. And they used to be the cost like 10 years ago at like a smaller size.
Mm-hmm.
But you can drive a cost down based on your size. But
Yeah.
at a smaller size, you can't. You don't have the negotiating power on that. And so
Mm-hmm.
then you get to, okay, so this is my cost, and it's, I don't know, let's say it's $1.50 an endpoint for the RMM.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so then you add on AV, and then you add on whatever other tool. Like, so at some
Sure.
point you're at $4 an endpoint. So you went from $1.50 to four. Um, you just almost quadrupled, like tripled your price on your seat and your cost.
Mm-hmm.
That's just your cost. So if you could suck out 60% of your cost on your seat,
Yeah.
what does that do to the profitability?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what you're saying, like, yeah, they look at, if you're looking at only the top line and the bottom line, and you're not looking at actually what's in between those that you can start pulling levers to make your business more profitable,
Mm-hmm.
like you'll never get to an EBITDA level that actually makes sense if you're actually building it for sale. Great.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then you have to start thinking about the unit economics because that's where you're going to get your leverage.
Right. I want to go back to one thing that you'd said almost too casually towards the beginning because I had never heard it broken down this way before, so I want to unpack it. But when you were talking about scales of 3 and 10, is
Mm-hmm.
that a like Harvard Business Review, something that I should know if I went and got an MBA number, or is that just like lived in the trenches across multiple realities where you just saw those thresholds emerge?
I can tell you where I heard it, and then
Mm-hmm.
I started testing it, and it tracked.
Okay,
Um, and I don't know where that person got it.
sure.
So I got it from a pastor named Craig Groeschel, who is pastor of one of the largest churches in the U.S. And at like 50,000 plus members
Mm-hmm.
across multiple states. I think they have campuses. Yeah, I don't know. It's like 30, 40 campuses.
Okay.
Started from his garage. So he's grown through that.
Mm-hmm.
And he has a leadership podcast where he talks about just organizational growth, talks about all sorts of stuff, but
Sure.
organizational growth is one of them. And I found a lot of that helpful. And that was one of the bigger things was at these sizes, we had to change things
Mm.
operationally about how we did the business or
Yeah.
how we did the organization for their case. It was a nonprofit, but
So
um, yeah.
with those levels, then, where my brain was trying to see that correlation, um, we can also see based on like average MSP sizes, right? Those two thresholds are by far the two biggest choke points for an MSP's growth. Just as you had even said, right? 4-ish
Yeah.
employees is like one extra body beyond the first breakpoint. And the reason that
Right.
exists is that reason, probably. The next biggest breakpoint is 10 employees. Those two things generally tend to focus around some top line numbers as well that, again, average out to be roughly where they are. So because you've seen it and you've been able to work orgs through it or beyond it or repair it or whatever, like are there any, so right would ask this question, what are the three things that you must be ruthlessly disciplined about to evolve beyond the 3 and the 10 number as it
Yeah.
compounds?
Um, Aligning your technical staff to your sales staff,
Mm, tell me
and
more.
well, and default to sales.
Okay.
So if you don't have, so sales is the most important part. That's the growth.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I guess cash flow is the other one. Like if you don't have cash, you're dead anyway.
Right.
Um, but past you have cash flow,
Mm-hmm.
aggressively grow, and that's the sales part.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is if you let the sales guys do whatever,
Yeah.
then you're going to grow in such a way that will break the business in other areas, and you'll lose clients. And so then you have your churn happening as fast as your sales are happening, and you're
Mm-hmm.
spinning your wheels. And so the way I solved that was actually I decided sales was the most important thing. And I told all of our sales team, if you ask me to go to a meeting, I will go to it. I don't
Mm.
care. I don't care
Yeah.
what else is on the books. I will go to it. And the only reason I did that wasn't because I thought I needed to be in the sales room. It's because I needed them to sell what was on the truck,
Sure.
and I needed to help coach them on how to how to organize deal structures and things like that, so that we didn't break the business while they were selling. And so it's a way to not apply the brake there, but
Mm-hmm.
also keep them in the lane, if you will. So that's maybe the
Yeah.
difference is most MSPs, they kind of go brake gas instead
Yeah.
of gas in lane.
Mm-hmm. No, it's a great way of breaking it down. Which I didn't realize this before. It's great that it's unfolding this way too. But like I learned a lot of the very similar lessons to what you're describing, but from different seats as well. And then I can say absolutely and unequivocally the thing that you just described is what led me to my transition from being on the tech side for the first 11 years into being on the sales side and growing sales teams. Was I spent 3 years in a seat with a label that's still annoying, which was VCIO, but I was the tech guy that got taken on every sales appointment. Um, and I looked at that role. I mean, it was basically a closing role, right? The salespeople did all the work to get me in the room. I used to call it on stage. They'd put me on
Yeah.
stage. I'd do the thing that was very normal and very natural, which was talking tech to business people, which was really about talking about business outcomes that was supported by tech. But
Mm-hmm.
and then we would close the deal like in at that meeting and walk away, and the rep would be amazed and happy and whatever. But I defaulted to growth because I loved that part of it. It took me 3 years to realize I was on the wrong side of the commission coin in that design, which was fine. And then switched and then got humbled like insanely hard because
Right.
I was naive to think that all I had to do was show up and be on stage. But there's like a whole lot else
A lot of
to
work.
sales and selling, right? So
Yeah.
I learned that and figured that out and built it into systems too. But the main thing was a couple things that I learned on that path. One, yes, default to sales. One of the things that I instilled or installed was realizing there were these two mental archetypes. I don't know if you saw this or not, but um, the technical archetype was here's the 100 reasons why this won't work.
Mm-hmm.
And if you apply that archetype to sales, it's a freaking disaster.
Yeah.
Then the sales archetype, or maybe just the growth or the business archetype, is how do I make this work?
Yep.
And it wasn't until I realized that my whole role in fighting all of the not negative inertia, but all of the technical inertia in the companies that I worked at was I was a technical person in sales conversations, constantly fighting the tech side of the business, saying, how can I make
Mm-hmm.
this work? Because I was tired of everyone telling me it couldn't when I knew damn well it could. But what really unlocked was when I would ask those really smart people, how can I make this work? And then it would
Yeah.
be like an immediate answer. And it was far better than anything I could come up with. But
That's good.
it's like you needed the input for the output to come out. And
Yeah.
so then I started doing that with the really brilliant technical people that I had, using them as like a pass through SE, right, to me sitting in that seat so that I understood and I could speak competently because they didn't want to do the sales part. That was fine. And the sales rep didn't know how to do the technical part. So that's why I just like sat in that wedge. But
Yeah.
that was the unlock for me, was that one question to the tech side of the business with a how do I get to yes approach, because you can always put a deal together, but you also needed to have the like ejection seat levers that said like that's just not a fit, right? And no,
Yeah.
we're not going to go do that. But
Yeah. There are times no is the right answer,
right,
um, but the tech people want to say it too often, and the
yeah,
salespeople don't want to ever say it, and you got
right.
to
And
thread the
then
needle on that.
the other angle to that, and this might make a little more sense to those listening of how it manifests in the company from the tech side is uh like perfect being the enemy of good, like over engineering, over solving, over attempting to get like pristine environment from day one rather than a realistic world where it's like, well, what are our red flags and our non-negotiables?
It almost would help if you had all the technical people study aviation,
Hmm.
because in aviation there's the concept of like perfect stability doesn't exist.
Got it.
And so it's always you're overcorrecting one way or the other in aviation to make things
Hmm.
work.
Yeah.
And that's a good picture of how a business grows and runs also.
Yeah. That's why I had never made that correlation before. Although I do recall hearing and picking up on and liking, I think it was the OODA loop, OODA maybe. And I think that
Yeah.
comes from like the pilot world.
Hmm.
Also, I don't remember what it stands for, but I do remember I liked the method or the model of thinking, which
Yeah.
similarly correlates to how you described it, right? Like
I,
nothing is
I
static.
literally just wrote something on OODA loops.
Did you?
Yeah. Observe, orient, decide, and act.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the thing that I neglected and saw neglected more than anything on the tech side was the observe part. And I was really fortunate in my first MSP. I'll call my first major MSP that I worked for. It was a business first, sales first, growth first oriented MSP. Started by a salesperson, and the sales methodology that they adopted was called spin selling at the time. And so everyone in the company had to read the book, even the tech people, right? Which is hilarious back at whatever I was, 23. But
Mhm.
sitting in those conversations, I actually loved the spin methodology and I adapted it to then when I became responsible for all 28 people on the service side was because it stands for situation, problem, implication, need, payoff. Like it's just a framework of questions.
Nice. Yeah.
And the thing that I realized was really tripping us up on the service side of the business was that we misinterpreted the problem for the situation all the time, or inverted
Mm,
that, right? So like we would see the problem as the problem, maybe the broken printer's there, but the problem was actually that the accountant needed to run payroll before 11:33. It's 11:22 and the printer's broken. So you really needed to understand the situation before you
yeah.
knew which problem to address, because it was never really the tech thing, it was always the outcome thing, which you talked about earlier. And spin selling was just a way of ripping the model and then reapplying it with tech level questions. And then that's
Yeah.
how I trained all my tech people was like, every ticket's going to come in and the problem's going to be defined, but the problem is never the problem. You have to go to the situation first to
That's
find it.
it's that deal where a priority one ticket for one client, printing may be like the last priority, and maybe priority four for one client, but another client that does shipping,
Mm-hmm.
when their printer's broken, they're not making money. That's priority one,
Right.
and it's knowing the context of those two distinct businesses of where that falls and
Yeah.
designing your service around it.
I have one question that might be slightly unorthodox because I do think your position and your experience and your worldview is deserving of really even asking it. What What's the right way to frame this and prep this question? Um, I hate best practices mostly because I had to live through them, and I always felt like they were too universally sterile or too outdated or too just uh, lots of things with a lot of four-letter words.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that like process and discipline and all of those other things weren't important. So it's not that. And I don't want to just ask you like a too open-ended of a question about what do you think about best practices, but you've transcended like traditional, let's call it 80% of the market at that whatever 10-person thing and like 0.8% of the market at 800.
Mhm.
Your relationship to best practices and your relationship to the real world, your perspective is unique to me. What have you found to be worthwhile,
Yeah.
redeeming? I don't know the right word. I think maybe you get where I'm trying to go with that, around or about best practices. And then what elements have you learned about applying best practices that you keep an arm's length away from?
Yeah. Yeah. I think so. Um, the best picture I have of it is there's two ways people think of it. And one is, I would argue, going to hurt at a certain size and a certain
Mhm.
level as you grow.
Yeah.
Um, and this is probably true for a lot of different things, but definitely for best practices is if you think of it as the frame of a house, um, you're going to run into walls.
Mm-hmm.
If you think of it like a compass, it's going to get you to your destination. Um, so directionally helpful.
Mm-hmm.
But if you can't adjust to go around the big rock that you're about to walk into
Yeah.
and then go point back to where you're supposed to go, then it's going to cause problems. And so
Yeah.
those are the pictures I would offer to it. Is it's a great compass. It's not a great structure.
Mm. Yeah. I love that. I love that analogy because that was, again, what I always felt in my seat was like I was the rock talking at the business as the best practice was coming towards us every time. And
Mm-hmm.
so, I mean, it wasn't uncommon for me to be called, labeled, or looked at as the guy who threw salt in the wound all the time, of like in those leadership meetings. And it wasn't just to be defiant, although there's an element of that to me. So I'm not saying that isn't it. It was just like, but this doesn't make sense for who we are, or
Right.
like this doesn't align to what we're trying to accomplish through this lens, right? And so,
Yeah.
to that point, I think I was more what you're describing, where it's like I understand it objectively, and by the time we mix in our DNA and what we want on the other side of it, then we can walk around the rock and get back on the path to true north and keep going. So I really like that compass analogy. So Boy
Yeah.
Scout and had to do orienteering, so I actually remember what that was like too. But yeah,
Yeah.
I love that one.
Yeah, because I mean, like I can probably go like if I looked at any service delivery team, like
Mm-hmm.
so I'm not gonna say service desk because at a certain size you have multiples of those.
Yeah.
But in any of them, if I took W2 multiple for that specific team,
Mm-hmm.
which at a certain size you have to kind of do backwards math to get there, but W2 multiple, I took utilization and I
Mm-hmm.
took kill percentage. I could probably tell you whether you need to hire or fire,
Got it.
but that's just numbers. That doesn't actually tell you if you need to hire or fire because there's like three or four other questions you should ask before making that decision.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you only look at like one of those or look at it entirely outside of context, um,
Hmm.
you're going to let someone go or you're going to hire somebody and it's going to cause a problem on one side or the other of that.
Yeah. Nice. Awesome. Love it. Um, Joshua, if people want to learn more, know more, follow you, understand you, learn from you, where do they find you?
Best place right now is LinkedIn. Hang out there a
Okay.
lot. The Josh B Jones is my profile handle. So
Awesome.
that's where I'm at. I have a website that so all of those posts transition to eventually
Sure.
joshbjon.es because buying joshuajones.com is impossible and expensive.
Yeah.
So
Right.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Excellent. And then can't let you off the hook until you leave one question behind for the next guest. So if there was one question that you got to leave behind for them to answer, what would it be?
Okay, this is going to be off of some of the stuff we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Um, what is your growth engine for individuals on your team? Like, how do you help individuals on your team think about their own growth?
Awesome. Love it. Joshua, thank you for coming on. Thank you for dropping such wisdom. I hope people go back and replay this and download the transcript and rip it apart and try to figure out how they can learn from the experience that you've had in MSP, because no matter where they are, given where you are now, you've been there and there's some truth to that. I always found that success left clues, and I was pretty ignorant if I chose to consciously ignore them. So hopefully the
Yeah,
audience, understands that that is also true, even if it requires killing your ego a little bit to accept it. But again, thank you for coming on, and I appreciate you being here.